What happens when a pack of cocky teenage bullies think they can torment a quiet farm girl in the middle of nowhere, only to discover she's not who she seems? Stick around till the end. You won't believe the twists in this story. And hey, if you love shocking revenge tales where karma strikes harder than a storm, don't forget to hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss another jaw-dropping story. It was one of those blistering summer evenings in a small rural town where cornfields stretched endlessly, cicadas buzzed like static in the air, and dust rose lazily from gravel roads, when 17-year-old Mara, the farm girl everyone thought was shy, timid, and forgettable, was out tending to her family's land after her father passed and her mother struggled to keep things afloat. But what nobody knew, not even her closest neighbors, was that before settling here in quiet obscurity, she had spent 2 years secretly enlisted in an elite youth operations training program under the Delta Force mentorship program through her late uncle, a career operator who had seen combat in places most Americans couldn't pronounce. And though Mara returned to the farm after tragedy, she carried with her skills that no ordinary teenager possessed, skills sharpened by discipline, silence, and a burning refusal to be preyed upon. So when the local high school bullies, a crew of arrogant town boys led by Colton Riker, a wealthy rancher's spoiled son who thought intimidation was his birthright, decided to target her for sport by trespassing on her land, wrecking her fences, mocking her clothes, and calling her Scarecrow Girl, they had no idea they were stepping onto the wrong battlefield, because on that particular night when they roared onto her property on dirt bikes with headlights blazing like hungry eyes, laughing as they threw beer cans into her crops, she was standing on the porch in silence, calm as a storm before thunder, waiting to see just how far they would push their cruelty. And when one of them, Ty, the loudest of the pack, hurled a firecracker toward her barn as a cruel joke, she darted forward with the speed of a striking hawk, catching it midair and snapping the fuse out with a flick, stunning the boys who didn't even process what they had seen, dismissing it as luck, and hollered louder to mask their unease. But Mara had already shifted her stance, measuring distances, noting shadows, and thinking not like prey but like a predator cornered in her own den. And as the bullies revved their bikes in circles, carving deep grooves into her soil, she shouted calmly, "This is your only chance. Leave." And though her voice was steady, they howled with laughter, misinterpreting control for weakness. So Colton sneered, "What are you gonna do, farm girl? Throw hay at us?" And that was when Mara's quiet mask began to crack, not with fear but with the faintest curve of a smile that unsettled them. For a smile on someone who should be terrified as a warning, though none of them recognized it, and so she let them dig their own graves of arrogance, waiting until Colton dismounted, swaggering toward her porch with a baseball bat he had brought for show, bragging about how he'd teach her, who runs this town. Yet before his boot touched the first wooden step, Mara moved, an almost imperceptible blur as she closed the gap, twisted his wrist with surgical precision, and the bat clattered to the dirt before he could blink, leaving him groaning in shock while his friends revved their engines uncertainly. But Mara didn't stop there. She kicked the bat away, dropped him with a controlled joint lock, and then stood over him without even raising her voice, whispering, "You chose the wrong farm." And though the others froze, pride outweighed reason. Satai. And the rest rushed forward, but Mara had trained against squads of grown men, learning to dismantle threats systematically, and within seconds she flipped one boy into a haystack, swept another's legs so hard he gasped for air, and then caught a punch mid-swing, redirecting it into its own owner's stomach, dropping him like a sack of grain. And the chaos was over before they even processed the start. The only sound left the rattling idle of bikes and the crackle of corn stalks in the breeze. Yet instead of retreating, the boys' bruised egos twisted their fear into rage, and they swore vengeance, vowing to return not just with fists but with weapons, which would set off a chain of events none of them could have imagined, because Mara had no intention of hiding or running, only teaching them that terrorizing people had consequences they couldn't handle. And over the following nights, the feud escalated, first with slashed tires on her tractor, then with stolen feed, and finally with spray-painted threats across her barn that read, "Scarecrow Girl, stay down." But every insult only hardened her resolve, and she began preparing, quietly rigging her land with non-lethal traps, motion lights, hidden cameras, and clever misdirections learned in tactical survival school. While in town the bullies bragged of how they'd break her spirit once and for all, never realizing she was studying them, learning their roots, predicting their arrogance like clockwork, until the night they stormed her property for the last time, armed with pellet rifles, chains, and cruel intentions, laughing that this would be the farm party. But Mara had transformed her home into a battlefield, and as they crept across her land, the first boy fell into a concealed pit she had dug and camouflaged with straw. Harmless but humiliating. Another tripped a tripwire that unleashed a flood of blinding floodlights and sirens that echoed like war drums, scattering them in confusion. And then Mara emerged from the shadows clad in black tactical gear she had kept hidden, her eyes reflecting firelight, moving like a ghost, dismantling their courage piece by piece, striking without anger but with terrifying precision, disarming Colton a second time, breaking Ty's confidence with a single chokehold that left him sputtering in the dirt, and forcing the rest to flee into the night screaming. But she didn't chase them, she didn't need to, because the message was written in their panic. That farm girl was no victim, she was a storm. And when the sheriff, who had long turned a blind eye to Colton's bullying due to his wealthy father's influence, arrived at the scene after hearing the commotion, he found the Riker boy and his friends bound neatly with their own chains, lined up like captured animals, evidence of vandalism in hand, and Mara sitting calmly on her porch sipping water as though nothing had happened. And though the sheriff at first hesitated, knowing how powerful Colton's family was, Mara simply handed over the hidden camera footage she had gathered, undeniable proof of their repeated trespasses, destruction, and attempted arson. And when the sheriff tried not to laugh at the absurdity of these so-called tough boys being outmaneuvered by a quiet farm girl, he finally cuffed them, muttering, "Guess the scarecrow's scarier than the crows." And from that night on, the legend of Mara spread through town like wildfire. The story of how a supposed nobody farm girl turned out to be Delta Force elite, a living reminder that appearances deceive, and bullies only thrive until they meet someone who fights back with unshakable strength. And while the boys faced charges, suspensions, and the collapse of their reputations, Mara returned to her chores the very next morning as though nothing had happened, the sun rising over fields that seemed calmer, freer, safer, for she had proven not only to them but to herself that she could protect what mattered most. And though whispers followed her wherever she went, some fearful, some admiring, she didn't mind, because real power is silent, steady, and unafraid of the darkness others bring. And from then on, whenever engines revved at night or laughter echoed across fields, people remembered the tale of the quiet farm girl who wasn't quiet at all but a force too strong to be broken, a storm that bullies should have never summoned, for they had asked for war on the wrong battlefield, and war was what they got, though not the kind they expected, but the kind that leaves scars deeper than bruises, teaching once and for all that sometimes the fiercest warrior wears the plainest boots and tends the humblest land, hiding fire beneath silence until provoked, and in that hidden strength lies the downfall of arrogance, which is why Mara's name became not a target of mockery but a warning, etched into the town's memory forever as the girl who was Delta Force elite and chose to protect instead of destroy, a reminder that courage doesn't need to shout, it only needs to stand its ground.